once Betsy said to me, you could maybe write some more of these, call this a series, my concern was, well, who's going to bring cases to him? I mean, how's he going to get into these? Because he's a lawyer, he's a family lawyer. He's not and my books don't take place in courtrooms or anything like that.
Right.
And what had happened in that very first book was his client was a very wealthy woman who asked Brady to help her because she trusted him, and it wasn't like he had any great expertise, but he was discreet and he knew his way around wealthy circles in Boston and so forth. So that was kind of something I latched onto, that he had wealthy clientele. He didn't have to worry about making a living. I thought that was nice.
Well, if you want him to be spending time sleuthing, some of it, if not pro bono, may be driven by his own curiosity.
Yeah.
You really did need to give him a source of income so that
Right.
he could be away from the office.
Right.
And it also turns out that's lucky because it supports his fishing habit.
Right, exactly.
So that's one of the biggest problems when you have a sleuth who's not a cop or, somebody actually hooked to the law enforcement profession, is how do they get paid? What do they live on while they're sleuthing?
Well, how do you keep getting them involved in murders?
That too.
Really,
No, it's both.
Yeah. So yes, he has a law practice going on. I try to refer to it, and occasionally, a little tiny subplot thing might be a case that he's working on to remind readers that he does work.
And you've given him a sort of long-suffering secretary who tries to keep him,
she does most
solvent.
of the work. She does most of the work in the office. Yeah.
And the truth is, for his kind of practice, somebody like Julie, isn't that her name?
Yep.
Somebody like Julie could do a huge amount,
Right.
especially today when there are so many canned documents and everything.
I've got a lot of feedback from lawyers who said I've got it right. It's very interesting because I pretty much made it up,
Well, I like Julie, and she's always there kind of as the focus while
Right,
he's got...
right.
You've also, I think, over the years evolved a strategy of having former clients return with problems.
Right.
Maybe they weren't a problem when they first came to him. Maybe it was just some routine thing
Right.
like an estate planning deal.
Right.
But then they show up. So sometimes it's the claim of some of these clients, isn't it, that gets Brady going.
Yep. I mean, when I start with a story, usually I'm starting out here somewhere with a crime or with a motive or with a murder or something, and I try to deal in my mind with, who's doing this and why. It's kind of an abstraction. And then my next question is, how do I get Brady involved in this? And sometimes it's straightforward, someone calls them up and say, I got a problem.
Right.
But sometimes it's a little more indirect.
And sometimes you send him away a bit. What was the book? It was early in the series where you send him up to Maine, and it's really kind of like Into the Woods and, that thing. What's the title of that one?
Dead Meat.
That was really the first Brady coin I read for some strange reason.
Yeah,
I didn't start with Death at Charity's Point, and I remember how much I liked it because it was really, as I say, kind of like Outward Bound. I mean, he's out in the woods and all of this. So you've had some good times doing New England. It isn't just Boston.
Well, New England really is the setting that I use. I don't think of them as Boston stories at all.
Right.
Almost every book, I don't know, I'm not sure I can say that, but most of the books branch out to Maine or New Hampshire. I mean, New England is so cool because, there's wilderness and there's woods and there's rivers and lakes, but there's urban slums and, everything.
Hard scrabble slums,
There's
too.
the ocean and, there's the mountains, there's everything.
I think Maine's a particularly interesting state. We always forget that Maine's really a frontier state.
It is. It actually is.
And a lot of wilderness along the frontier.
Yep. There are towns that are not incorporated up there that are known by numbers. Township 6, with population of 11 people. And,
there are a couple of authors whose works I've absolutely loved. John Connolly writes a really dark, but his Charlie Parker books take place in rural Maine most of the time, not always. And I was really fond of the works of Jerry Boyle, who teaches at Colby College, and who hasn't published for a while, but he wrote a really good book about, I think it was a paper mill along, is it Amagansett? Do I have that right?
well, there's so many rivers, but yes, that's
okay. Well, there is one, which may be a fictitious name, but I think it's real. And then he also did a really interesting story about during the Revolutionary War, troops trying to go up through Maine to get to Canada before. I'm trying to remember who, but Canada, according to this, if they had managed to get there, was it Benedict Arnold leading those troops? I think it was. Well, I've read the.
That's not fair.
I'm sorry.
Test my history.
Okay, but the point is that Maine really
Maine is really cool. Yeah, there's a lot. And as you know, I have a series that's going on in Maine.
Well, I was going to mention that the fishing really carried over to the Stoney Calhoun books.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he is a guy who's using being a fishing guide and fishing as kind of therapy for some bad knocks.
Well, that was all calculated. I'm not a very calculating person. No, Barbara, I'm not.
As a writer,
but that was something I calculated, that if I, because as you know, I write about fishing. I write for fishing magazines. I publish some books on fly fishing. And it occurred to me that if I wrote a fly fishing mystery, for lack of a better term, everybody who likes my fishing writing would flock to it, and everybody who likes my mystery writing would flock to it, and I'd like instantly double my readership, and I'd be rich and famous now.
How'd that work?
Well, I'm as rich and famous as I was when I had the ideas. I got the books published, but it was interesting that the New York publishing world had an experience with somebody who had written 2 or 3 mysteries with fly fishing in them, and they didn't sell very well, so the word that kept coming down was, oh, fly fishing mysteries don't sell. So there was a lot of negativity about.
Actually, it's the character. I think Stoney is a fabulous character.
Yeah, well, he's fun. He's fun to write.
Are you still working with him?
Yeah, I'm just right now.
I think we have one here, which is.
This is, I think.
Is it Gray Ghost?
Yeah, Gray Ghost.
Right.
That's the second in the. That's the second in the series. Yeah, and I'm trying to make up a story that will become the third one right now as we speak.
You've got an interesting problem with Stoney, I think, in the sense that, because he's leading this so alone life, you can't, it's sort of hard to write about somebody who's totally unconnected, so gradually he's having to get a bit connected, and then some of the mystique goes away, doesn't it? He
has a mysterious past that he doesn't know because he's lost his memory, and I'm going to try to tap into that. He was some kind of spook. I mean, he was. And he can't keep finding bodies in the woods, so.
Fair enough.
We'll see what happens.
Well, I do like him, and I've been kind of interested in the way that he goes. One of the things that Brady, though, over the course of all these books, because now I have read all of them, he's had some sort of on-again, off-again romances. Things haven't always worked out for him all that well.
Poor guy, I know.
It reminds me of Les Roberts, whose books I truly loved, and his Milan Yakovich books. I don't know if you ever read them, but somebody at a mystery conference once said to him, how come Milan never really gets any? And Les said, he said, when I get some, Milan will get some. And I have thought, since Evie, or do you pronounce it Evie?
I pronounce it Evie, but.
Okay. Since Evie came into Brady's life in these last few books, you yourself have settled down with your wife, Vicki Stifel, the writer. And I wondered if part of the reason this has been a more long-term relationship for Brady is that you've kind of settled into one of your own.
It could be. I
know that's a Freudian sort of question.
Yeah, no, it's very deep, Barbara. And I think that there's a lot of me going on and a lot of these relationship things. I mean, when I invented Brady, I lived in a suburb of Boston with a wife and 3 kids and a 9-to-5 job and all that kind of thing. I made him divorced. And I wasn't aware of it at the time, but looking back, I'm positive I made him divorced to see how that would be. What would it be like? Because my marriage wasn't very good.
Okay.
And we ultimately did get divorced.
So you're
And I
kind
was-
of test driving it?
It was kind of like that.